Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome to the next installment of the Everpure Leadership Series. This is a series of conversations with industry leaders where we dive deep into topical matters concerning with data and the entire ecosystem that surrounds it. Today, we will be touching on that touchy subject of cyber resilience. And the title of today's discussion will be When the Backup Becomes the Breach. Let's start with something most of us believe and something that's quietly and expensively wrong. Backup is the safety net. If ransomware hits, if something fails, you recover. That's been the deal for 30 years. The attackers apparently have read that playbook. They have rewrote it. Their version starts by taking out your backup before the encryption payload fires. By the time you know you've been hit, the recovery option is already gone. And here's the second problem. Even if your backup survives, you may not be allowed to use it. A recovery workflow that pulls data across the wrong border under the wrong jurisdiction doesn't solve your crisis. It actually creates a second one. Your disaster recovery plan becomes a compliance liability. That's the conversation we are having today with three people who are living it, not just theorizing it. First, we have Matthew Usvin, Vice President and CTO for Asia Pacific and Japan at Everpure, a company formerly called Pure Storage. Matt has been one of the clearest voices in this region on what resilience actually demands in 2026. He's put it in writing across multiple platforms. His argument, in brief, indelibility is no longer the finish line. And today I would like to find out where he thinks that finish line actually is. Next, we have Sylvia Ian Sentkian, Director of Information Security and Risk Management at Swire Coca-Cola, and a CSO 30 ASEAN honoree. Here's the detail that matters most for today. She spends over 70% of her time not in a SOC, but lobbying boards and translating technical risk into language that moves decisions. She also secures both IT and OT environments, which means her resilience calls affects bottling lines, as well as databases. And lastly, we have Dr. Shakti Goel, Chief Architect and Data Scientist at Yatra Online. He built DIA, DIYA, Yatra's Gen AI-powered travel assistant, which operates over multiple languages. And he's been very specific publicly about what guardrails he's built around data sovereignty and AI. He's also navigating India's DPDP Act in real time, which is in its own very live experiment. And to our audience, thanks for tuning into this, what I think is a very topical conversation. We want you to be part of this conversation as well. So please do ask your questions by sending it using the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, but the Q&A tab. We'll pull in the live questions in and ask the right panelists as we move through the conversation. Right, Matt, Sylvia, and Dr. Shakti, let's dive in. I'll start with Matt. There's a phrase you've used that I want to put to the test today, which I mentioned before. Indelibility is the baseline, not the finish line. For years, backup was where the security conversation often ended. Now you're arguing it's where the attack begins, that threat actors hit the backup environment before the ransomware payload ever fires. When did that inversion become operationally real, and in how customers are actually getting hit?
Thanks, Winston. And I want to add a little context to that. Not that you're taking me out of context, but the very mention of a finish line when it comes to this type of protection, I think, is something of a fallacy. While it's nice to have a destination in sight and something to aim for, what's the saying? People who aim for nothing tend to hit it with remarkable accuracy. The fact is that the target we are trying to aim for here is continuously moving. The point you're making was around the inversion. When did indelibility become a baseline? And I think in the last 18 to 24 months, we saw a definitive shift in what I would call the dwell time. The bad threat actors, whether they're criminal organizations, whether they're nation states, in the past were dwelling inside environments for days and for weeks. What we started to see in this last year, year and a half, of those dwell times really starting to expand, where that average is sitting at around 200 days now. And that's a phenomenal amount of time for them to be able to observe what I call the rhythm of the business, understanding what the environment is, how it's run, and some of the nuances, quirks, and features, if you will, of how things work within a particular organization. And it allows them incredible ability to be able to identify things like backup servers, compromise things like administration credentials, and delete snapshots. So the net effect of all of this is that by the time we see a ransomware hit, that screen pops up, that safety net has already been cut. And if you aren't treating your backup environment as your most sensitive, high value target, you're essentially just leaving the keys to the vault under your doormat. So I think there's a lot has changed in the last 18 to 24 months. And certainly the bad threat actors are getting far more intelligent and far more patient than they were in the past.
Thanks, Matt. And Sylvia, what Matt has given is from a platform perspective. Well, what about when a threat intel arrives in your environment, especially when it comes to backups? Uh, what are you doing, and how do you actually handle it?
Okay, for the backup, since I would believe a lot of enterprise customers who's running in multiple jurisdictions, they always have the restrictions on regulations because local regulations sometimes is different across different country. So the data protection regime is also different. So I would say that for that, cyber resilience cannot just be defined as simply keeping system up or restoring data after an incident, but it means ability to maintain a safe, compliant, and operationally viable business continuity across different jurisdictions. So going back to your questions, how's the data being backed up? It is on different market, of course. From I'm standing from the group CISO perspective, we should have a good governance framework across all our markets. But each market, as I mentioned before, the jurisdiction might be different on the regulation requirements, political, and other operation constraints. So each market should have their own freedom to maintain their backup according to our guidance. And that is what I'm stressing. You cannot have a one size fits all solution if you're running a multiple market enterprise.
Dr. Shakti, your thoughts?
See, when you take a data backup, like we follow a certain strategy. I will say that like for Yatra Online is an Indian company that deals with a lot of corporate travel and all the big fours and big consulting firms. They are our customers. So they need to be SOC 1, SOC 2 compliant. And in order for them to be compliant, we have to be compliant. Then we are also listed, on NASDAQ. And for that reason, we have to be SOX compliant, SOX compliant. In addition to that, we have to follow the DPDP laws, which is the digital privacy and the data protection laws of India. So there's a lot of compliance we have to do, and our backup strategy is kind of governed by that. Now, when we take a backup, so we kind of have a 3-layer architecture. The first layer is the storage layer. So as Sylvia mentioned, you would take storage. Incidentally, we are an Indian company, right? So, and we have some presence in UAE. We are not global like Swire or like Coca-Cola, but we do have a lot of data for our international customers. For example, Mitsubishi and Isuzu, they are also our customers, and there's a lot of travel from Japan. Now, what we do is we take a backup of this data and like have it in storage. And this storage is generally isolated from our entire network. The other layer of that architecture is, like we have got a metadata layer. What we do is we label each and every backup. So for instance, okay, this backup uh, honors the DPDP laws. This is for SOX. This cannot go to the US. This has to stay in India. This was the last time it was backup. And this is the granularity of data. So what happens is data is not simple. You may have 1 or 2% of data that is highly regulated, and the rest of the data may be like completely transactional. So how much of data is like regulated? Then you have got like dynamic tagging of like all this metadata. And the reason we have to do dynamic is because the laws change continuously. Right now we may be on version 3 or DPDP, and what if it changes to version 4? Are you compliant for version 4? That's how it is. Then we have a policy engine, like a rules engine that sits on top of it. See what I'm saying? So that when a need for a backup comes up, that policy engine is going to kick in and is going to tell that IT engineer whether you can do what you're doing. Right. So here we try to do, kind of a balancing act between the legal requirements as well and the IT and the software requirements. And the third layer is obviously the target system, where the backup has to be restored. So all this makes, the overall architecture, the systems kind of involved and complex. And there is often a lot of conflict between these governance laws, and this leads to kind of operational paralysis, I would say. You're sitting there 2 a.m. and you want to do a backup and implementation and you cannot. So we try to kind of navigate through that.
Winston, can I just jump in?
Sure.
Dr. Gold, that was really insightful, and I think you shine a spotlight on just how complex and hard work is required to keep on top of this. I'm really curious because you mentioned DPDP. That we know is legislation that's constantly changing, and it may, through the course of 2026, continue to grow teeth and become sharper. How do you respond to that from a legislative perspective when you are, looking to ensure that you're constantly compliant?
Yeah, see, actually, the first thing is that the companies don't have to be 100% compliant till May of 27, right? So that's the leeway the government has given. And the other thing is, I actually, asked some experts, how much compliant we have to be. So they said that you have to be compliant by intention and not by forensics. What I mean is that if your customer comes and says, hey, you know what, I don't want you to keep my data, just go and delete it. There's no way that you can delete data, right? It always sits on the desk. You can use forensic tools. You can go to the hardware sectors, the disk sectors, and always recover data. So the implementation that we have is by intention. So if I run a delete statement, remove the data, if I obfuscate the data, that kind of satisfies the law. Incidentally, there are not many restrictions which say that the data cannot move out. However, if you are a bank or an NBFC, like a non-banking financial corporation, then you come under the purview of the Reserve Bank of India. There, the restrictions are very strong and powerful. And there you have to be within the boundary, right? Within the boundaries of the law. Like you have to be, all your data has to be within India. Now, let's say you have to be SOX compliant also. For example, HDFC Bank, it kind of trades on NASDAQ. So what would they be doing? I would imagine, when you have to show SOX compliance and you have to honor DPDP, and you have to honor the RBI mandate, you generally have export companies like BDO, like PwC, like Deloitte, who will do a certification for you for SOX, right? And that certification report then goes out to the regulators on NASDAQ. So that way your data is not moving out of the boundary, it stays in the country. So this is how we are trying to navigate it. But fortunately, DPDP laws, law has not been implemented in full force in India.
Thanks,
Well,
Dr.
I
Shakti.
agree.
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
I thought Dr. Groth bring a very good point about the data backup. I would just stress a little bit about the basic fundamental. Before you do a backup or everything, you need to identify your data inventory and classify your data first. Because if you don't know what is important, especially I'm where two has one of the hat is the DPO. We need to understand what is the personal data. Not in terms of a global point of view, you need to map to the jurisdiction where it is operate. different country have different understanding what is personal data, sensitive personal data. And then you need to make sure that you ring fence it and then protect it somehow. Yes.
Good
Yeah.
point, Sylvia.
So-
And Dr. Shakti, I just wanted to highlight also that, or ask, dig further, you could say, fourth iteration of DPDPA, it still does not have any provisions for agentic AI. So do you see the next few iterations going forward? You're basically working on a moving target, right?
Yeah. See, DPDP law is only about data. It is not about technology. There is another law coming up in India, and I think it's called Digital India Act. Yeah, DIA, Digital India Act, which is going to replace the IT Act of 2000. And this act is and this actually takes care of all the new technologies, not just agentic AI, even like blockchain is there. If you sell something on the platform, who is responsible for the sale? So if you're selling a ticket, like an air ticket from Air India for Lufthansa, and the ticket gets canceled and the customer has to go through a problem, whose fault is it? Is it the platform? Is it the airlines, right? So that Digital India Act is going to lay emphasis on that, and that is going to control it. But incidentally, that is still in works, and not even the first version has been released. But agentic AI, we do a lot of work in agentic AI, and I can, like, every day I struggle with, I mean, I see a lot of new work happening, and I try to figure out what is fact and what is fiction. So agentic AI, we see that, oh my God, it's going to go on its own, and then it's going to cause so much havoc. No, that is science fiction, right? So that's not going to happen. So like it depends on how you design your application, what guardrails are there, where you put the guardrails. But to go back to your answer and to make it short, DPDP does not cover agentic AI. That is only about data. Yeah.
Sylvia, going back to the idea about cyber resilience, you are running IT and OT environments at the same time. So when you define cyber resilience, what does that actually mean for a multi-jurisdictional enterprise? And where, in practical terms, do the tensions actually sit, where that nobody outside your team fully appreciates?
So I would say that the resilience, as you know, that must cover both IT and OT. I just cannot cover just one of that. And then the difference is that IT is focused mostly on, availability, system uptime recovery, objective CIA. And OT, especially in our business, is more on first safety, personal safety, and then product integrity, pond continuity, and control the restart. So what is the difference when you're on the OT? You need to make sure that you have a good segmentation between IT and OT, make sure that they are separate from each other, and you need to have manufacturing procedures. Of course, as a plant operator, they already have the BCP, like not only on cyber incident, for example, earthquake, for example, pandemic. How do you operate under these circumstances? So they already have this kind of fallback procedure. Safety shutdown, and then restoration, of course. It is, you can tell that it's not only an IT security team. You have a lot of people need to coordinate during this. Plant operator, plant manager, and then of course the vendor as well, because of the bottling business or manufacturing plant, you have proprietary equipment. Sometimes you need to pull in the vendor as well. And what I see the challenges that underestimate is mostly not about technical. Technical, I would say that is the easiest part. Technical, you just implement the solution. But the way how you implement the solution, it is what make it difficult and then often underestimate. They are legal requirement, political, and operational. So you need to estimate or take this into consideration. Just give you an example, for example, cross-border data and visibility. So as a CISO, I want to get visibility of all my market, like audit log or something to put in the MSOC, but that might be a restriction on the local market. Hey, Some of them are sensitive data. You cannot export it, or you need to export it under circumstances. So we need to follow the regulation. So that might be a challenge that is not about technical. As I said, technical is easy. You just collect all the log centrally. But how do you make this work within the compliance frame? So this is something that a lot of people just like underestimate the effort of it, how to make this work.
And also,
Matt,
also
go ahead.
one thing I want to add here shortly is that, we have all these laws, but before all this came out, there's something called ISO 27001. A lot of companies are required to be compliant there, and they actually take care of all the, a lot of disaster scenarios. As Sylvia mentioned, there's a concept of BCP, business continuity protocol or something, right? So if like an earthquake or like a disaster strikes, what happened in the World Trade Center in 2001, there was a major insurance company that got hit, but they had invested heavily in like DR, and because of which, a lot of their applications data, they were able to retrieve. So yeah, I'm just going to add that, a lot of companies are compliant on ISO 27001, and by doing so, they somehow handle, all these data recovery issues.
Thanks. Matt, why not go back to you? And we are trying to move into data sovereignty, which is what is an issue that both Dr. Shakti and Sylvia has been alluding to. You draw a sharp line between data residency and genuine sovereign control. You've argued that infrastructure can remain legally reachable regardless of geography under frameworks like US Cloud Act, meaning residency without control can be seen as expensive real estate. Can you walk us through that?
I would love to, because I think there's a lot of education that's required in the marketplace on this. People are starting to become more aware of data sovereignty and truly understanding what it is. But let's be clear, it's a phenomenon that started maybe 2 or 3 years ago from a focal point of view in Western Europe. And that wave has started to emanate through legislation and through other mechanisms to the east. It's not an American issue. This is an international issue. And I think in the last 12 months, the last 24 months, probably the last year and a half, geopolitics has really thrust itself into the forefront here to make people aware of where your data is located and the importance of that, and particularly the underlying ownership structures. We've seen things like the US Cloud Act passed, 5, 6 years ago. Well, now we're starting to ask questions about what the implications of that are. And we're asking those questions because there, I think, has been an erosion of trust in international administrations that are leading countries around the world and the prioritization they have of their own nation states. What we know to be true is that the US Cloud Act enables the United States in particular, CIA, FBI, NSA, the three-letter acronym agencies, to be able, through a court order, and it could be a secret court order that you wouldn't know about, to be able to access, to be able to alter the information that resides in a data center that may be in your country. And this is a particular concern because we have seen a lot of what I call sovereign washing taking place. Sovereign washing is when we have services, particularly from hyperscalers, that have been labeled as sovereign and sold as sovereign, but they're truly not. And they're truly not because of the underlying ownership structure. So what do you need to look at here? What you need to look at is not just where the availability zone or where the data center is located. What I want to know is which international court has jurisdiction over the data that sits within there as well. Now, I'm in Singapore. I, as a Singaporean organization, hypothetically, would imagine that if I use an availability zone there, I would be just subject to the laws of the country that I am living in and working from and paying my taxes to. The very idea that there are tentacles leading to other nations, and it's not just the United States, is deeply concerning. And I think this is where I go back to that point of education. We're starting to become aware of it in the region, but it is a critical issue, particularly as we move through this bumpy phase, if I can call it that, of geopolitical instability.
Sylvia, your thoughts, since this is not hypothetical. It's actually more structural. And how do you actually see the way you look at risk? And is this conversation reaching boards in those terms, or is it still a technology procurement question?
It is definitely not a technology procurement question. It need to bring to the board because the board need to understand all kind of enterprise risks. I believe, as I said, it is not. It is definitely not a procurement questions. The board need to understand the risk, and cybersecurity is an enterprise, one of the enterprise risks. When the act is here, we need to understand what is the implication. As Matt said, where is the jurisdiction that can be affected us and how we are going to do this. The best strategy, I will say that too, is to store the data locally as much as you can to avoid all this cross-border data transfer. And then you lower the risk. But storing the data cannot protect the data. You need to make sure that the classify, properly encrypt, and make sure that the security control are in place.
Thanks. Dr. Shakti, you got something to add?
There are quite a few things. I mean, from data classification point of view, if you classify your data properly, then it will guide you as to what you can store where and what you can send across your borders. So that is the key thing. So you have to identify the PII data, the personal identifiable information, then look at the laws and see what can be sent out or not. But generally, what happens is, if, like as I mentioned earlier, if you cannot send out the raw data, right, outside the country, you always have organizations like BDO, like PwC, like Deloitte, who will do the analysis for you, and then they will do the audit, I mean, all the due diligence and send a report out to meet the compliances. So that's actually what we do. But yes, if you're an international company, then oh my God, there's so many different laws that have now kicked in or they're coming in, which say that you cannot transfer personally identifiable information. Name is not personally identifiable, but name combined with email or with phone number or with address becomes personally identifiable. And that information you cannot send out. So that has to be stored locally.
Yeah, Dr. Gold makes a good point here as well about the amount of legislation that's coming in around the region. It's forecasted that this year there's going to be a great deal of it. And when we start invoking concepts like multi-jurisdictionality that Sylvia's working with, becomes complex very quickly. Look, let's also work from the premise that not all data is created equal and it's not stored equally as well. When it comes to, big block-based environments where we've got databases that we have ownership from, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that we've got an element of control there. But what about SaaS applications? What about, my CRM? What about my ERP and other mechanisms that may be accessed via the web and sitting in data centers in the United States or elsewhere? I think what we're starting to see in response to Dr. Gold's point of this legislation rise is legal departments from large organizations responding by changing the RFP and the RFIs that they're putting out to the marketplace as well. And they're starting to state, hey, we want to have some protection from a sovereignty perspective. And they're putting this back onto the vendors. And I think rightly so. So asking reasonable questions about where the data is located and what would happen under certain mitigating circumstances is important to understand. It's moving really quickly, this space. It's quite fascinating. And I think where we'll end up at the end of 2026 is very different from the position that we're in today.
Okay. And
I completely agree with what Matt said. It's important we consider our vendor, SaaS vendor, because you never know how they resize the data if you don't ask. Even you need to understand how is their fallback strategy in case if their primary site is failed, where they go on the secondary. So you really need to have a good idea on this before you plan on anything. And then that is a thorough risk assessment on the vendor before you engage with them.
Thanks. And we will see the appearance of Sylvia very soon. We'll like to go into no worries. Also, I'd like to ask our audience if you have any questions, please do send in through the Q&A button. We are more than happy to look through the questions and I would like to pose them also to our panelists who have a wealth of knowledge which you can pick through. Now, I'd like to move to accountability gap, more on a realistic point of view. And I'd like to talk to Dr. Shakti about this. You know, when a recovery action, and this is not just a ransomware hit, the recovery action, if it violates a data residency mandate and the organization only finds out after the fact, usually when I've talked to CISOs and data owners, accountability sort of scatters. So question here is, if a CISO says, the CISO will say this is an infrastructure decision, infrastructure guys will say we followed the playbook, the board will say they weren't briefed. As a chief architect and a chief data scientist at Yatra, how do you see this accountability question addressed, and how are you working with the CISO or the security organization in your company?
Sure, that's actually a very relevant question, and now it builds upon what we have discussed so far. There are like three pillars, that you have to worry about, and I think we have talked about it. One is data sovereignty, secondly the regulatory compliance, and the third is operational recovery. They all have to work together, right? Now, generally, what happens is there are governance frameworks, there's a RISI matrix, and all that. But these governance frameworks say, okay, have you followed the protocol? And you say, yes, I did this, I did everything by the book. But still, the whole thing ends up in a disaster. So here, everyone is safe because they follow the protocol, but there is diffusion of accountability in a way, right? So how do you handle this? We can handle it through technology, and this is what I was trying to allude to earlier in terms of metadata. Once you have taken a backup, make it self-aware. And when we say self-aware, that backup is tagged with multiple attributes. And the attributes could be, the data sovereignty requirement, data residency, data ownership, compliance, and all the DPDP, GDPR, CCPA, whatever compliance is there. So if you do that, then the recovery at that time becomes easy. The other thing is, I think the systems should be like a system which handles data recovery should be developed and owned by a single person. So let's say if I have the 3-layer architecture of storage and metadata layer and policy engine and recovery, and it is developed by, let's say, an architect who is also responsible for data, then the system should work. Then you cannot say that, look, I built it, but it didn't work. You build it, you own it, and you are the single person point of contact. In that case, that relay race that happens between different teams, and the baton gets dropped somewhere, that will not happen. So that is the way to go. I think that there is now, the technology has advanced so much, even AI side and all that you can make a lot of this AI compliance and automate a lot of things, so that, when you press the button for recovery, it will say, hey, yes, I'll do the recovery. Hey, no, you cannot do it because of all these reasons.
Thank you. Matt, when you talk to other organizations, where do you see the friction lines when it comes to practically this kind of practical scenario?
I'm going to push back a little bit, and I'm not going to suggest that I see friction. I'm sure that it exists. It just does inside organizations. But I think what maybe a lot of technologists are guilty of is good intentions, best intentions. We're talking about an individual contributor that doesn't really understand that resilience isn't just a technical checkbox. It's a team sport. They need to bring the right people along with them. And their best intention is that they'd like to solve this particular problem, and they're going to move in isolation to do that. And they're not going to bring enough people on the journey with them. And I think, look, I love that mantra of solving problems and getting things done. But like I say, team sport, many people need to be involved here. So perhaps there's a better level of education that can take place as well, where we've got these individuals that do want to solve problems to say, hey, you need to talk to legal. You probably need to talk to HR. Does the board know? Does the CEO know? Does the COO know? and give them a level of authority to be able to make decisions and accountability to bring people along on this journey with them. So I'm going to take a more positive spin on that. Yes, I'm sure friction exists, but I think there's also a lot of good intentions there that are just a little misplaced, and some gaps appear because of it.
Sylvia, welcome back. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
And I was just trying to extend to what Matt just mentioned. You mentioned before there is this need to educate the board, especially, and bring them along the journey when it comes to recovery and security. In a situation when something happens, how do you close the gap quickly to get the board on educated fast enough to make sure that decisions are made quickly?
I think it is about ongoing communication. You cannot just do it in one go, especially if times are tight, especially touchwood incidents are happening. You cannot explain to them, hey, this is what you need to do. It is a continual education. If I would say that get the executive buy-in first to see why it is important, not on a technical term. You always need to link to the business. What is the impact on the business? If you don't do that, you might have risk exposure. You might have regulation compliance exposure. So all this they need to understand. And then when you let them understand what is your reason, and then you start adding more and more. And of course, preparations. What does this include? Incident drill, tabletop exercise. You get them prepared before anything happen, and then they aware of it. And good to share some of the industrial news. That is, oh, it happened. Some industry, even government body, have a data breach. All this, then they understand what are the implications and what is the responsibility they need to take. And with that, they will support you in case of anything. But you need to be like an advisory role to see, hey, I will command you, or they not, hey, just leave it to them, leave them to decide. No, this is what a CISO or DPO should be.
Okay, thank you. And again, back to the audience, please do ask or send in any of your questions that you may have for the panelists. We will be more than happy to entertain them. I'd like to shift to another topic, which is all the rave now, which is basically agentic AI. And Dr. Shakti, I would like to ask, you've been very specific about guardrails. LLMs via API only, PII blocked from leaving the environment, data anonymized at the application layer. But that's the architecture you have designed. My question is, what about the architecture that people are yet to anticipate? So when it comes to agentic AI, we are talking about more capable, more autonomous agents making decisions. How confident are you that those guardrails can hold?
Sure, Winston, that's a very relevant question in the day and age of generative AI and large language models. I mean, there's a big unknown out there, and whenever there's an unknown, it kind of causes uncertainty and fear that what if AI gets out of hand, and what kind of damage it can cause. So at Yatra, we have developed this bot, DI. It's an acronym for Digitally Intelligent Yatra Application, DIYA. And DI is in the Hindi or Sanskrit language, it means a light lamp. It's a lamp. So now, when you put guardrails, the guardrails are not only at the prompt level, at the LLM level. Generally, the way agentic AI works is that you tell LLM, the large language model, what you're supposed to do. You say that you can do this, but you cannot do that. However, there's something called hallucination. LLM, may think that it's doing the right thing, but it's not doing the right thing. So it doesn't understand, whether it should be doing what it's doing. That is kind of hallucination. So what you do is you put guardrails at the LLM level, but at the same time, they are in the input. Whatever data you are feeding in, that is controlled by software engineering, right? There's no AI there, or whatever is coming out of the AI bot and whatever is again checked through the AI engineering layer. to make sure whatever is coming out is right. And that kind of guardrail will always work, right? The other thing is that the logs that are created, they are regularly checked, and we see that if the bot or if the AI application is doing something that it's not supposed to do, that is immediately caught. And the other thing is there are more than 400 large language models, 400 different versions. Some are small models, some are large models. So we don't rely on one model. We give a part of the task to one model, let's say to Gemini, and the other one may go to OpenAI, and the third one may go to Claude, So that's how we kind of distribute and try to manage the risk. But one important thing is not everything we build or companies build around the world should be 100% agentic AI. What agentic means is that, let's say, I ask a question, I need a flight from Delhi to Beijing for June 15, show me the options, Now you submit this question to LLM and it is going to interpret the intention of what you asked. Then it will call a whole bunch of AI agents. And each AI agent will look at the question and say, yeah, no, I don't do that. I'm more responsible for cancellation of a flight search. And finally, it lands with the right agent and which says, okay, my job is to do a flight search and let me take on this question. That is how it's supposed to work, right? But we don't do it that way. We do the interpretation of the question saying that, hey, the person wants to go from Delhi to Beijing on May 15th or June 15th, whatever, and we call that API, right? API, which will do the search. That way, we have developed a mix of agentic, of AI and APIs. So it is kind of rule-based. It's a mix of both. And in that scenario, if the API is not exposed to the agentic AI, there's no way AI can go outside the boundaries, right? Because it does not know where to go. That is how we control, a lot of these things. So as I mentioned earlier, if you see that agentic AI can cause havoc and all that, we are not at that stage yet. We are at OpenAI chat models 5.5, Gemini 3.0. Yeah, by the time we get to, let's say, Gemini 10.0, or like Quen, Quen is a model from Alibaba. If it goes to 10.0, that time we may become like these models will become super intelligent. And then I cannot predict what they will do. But right now, there are enough guardrails that they cannot breach.
Matt, do you have a viewpoint, especially when you're talking to customers? We are talking about agents that's responding to queries to now initiating actions. Does that mean sovereignty needs to be right up front when it comes to what you call shaping the development of these agents? Do you have this kind of conversations?
There's a few different ways to answer this. I think the direct answer here is if you're in an industry that's highly regulated, so banking, financial services, insurance in one category, healthcare, defense, particular parts of government, there's lots of PII, etc. inside the data, then you need to have sovereignty considerations as well. I, as a resident of Singapore that's using the healthcare system, wouldn't want my data to be trained in in another jurisdiction. For example, I'd want to make sure that personally identifying information is stripped out, all of these basics. So yeah, sovereignty is going to play a big issue here. But I just want to step back and address this more from an architectural perspective and how that integrates with the business, because there's a lot of challenges, obviously, internally trying to get AI to work. On the one hand, we were listening to Dr. Goel talking about the fact that he's essentially using different models, and my language to describe what he was doing is I use different keys to unlock different locks. Each of these models has particular attributes that solves a particular problem, and it does so and outperforms other models. So I've got this collection of models inside my environment on the one hand, and then I need to feed that with data so that it's useful. The challenge that we've had from the data perspective, of course, is that it's either going to be siloed. It is inaccessible for a variety of reasons. It could be sitting inside legacy systems. The list goes on. So what have we done to try and solve it? Well, we've aggregated that information and we've put it into, we'll call it data lakes. You could give it any particular name, but essentially here is one source of information that accesses a multitude of what was in the past silos of data within my organization and puts it on a performance tier that enables it to be ingested inside data pipelines. Brilliant. how do you secure it, and how do you ensure that it's located appropriately and backed up with the right level of rigor and governance as well. There's an enormous amount of issue that we're going to be creating tomorrow, the problems of tomorrow. One particular thing that I'm watching at the moment is the fact that these bad actors I'm talking about are acutely aware of the fact that we are building these honeypots, right? We've got these massive, resources of data. We need to protect it, and they're learning to attack it in different ways as well. If we encrypt that data, well, or if they encrypt the data, it's pretty obvious that they're in there and that they're tampering with the systems. But if they have malicious intentions, they can change some of this data ever so slightly. 1% of the information contained with a database, if that's changed and then trained upon, and we're using that from an agent perspective, we're going to get a level of drift or configuration drift from what we want to achieve that would end up negatively affecting a share price. I mean, it would be that catastrophic, to say nothing, of course, of the fact that ostensibly the technology doesn't work. So what we need to be conscious of from a resiliency perspective is to ensure that these data lakes that we're creating are protected to another level that we were before, so that we don't disrupt the integrity and the output of the AI models that we're running on top of it.
Sylvia, from your perspective, how are you translating what Matt has just mentioned to the board level? Because there's a lot of buzzwords flying around. There's also lots of hype that is being based on agentic AI.
Yeah, well, this is a really hot topic now, agentic AI. Everyone is talking about it either on the attacker side or on the render side. So, of course, the board, they want new ideas, innovation. They might looking at how we can leverage Gen AI in the business. That is very natural. And then what you need to understand to the board is about the risk. I always bring back on the risk. What risks are? We are not saying those buzzword LLM, they might not need what it is. So we really need them to understand and then to make sure that they support our decision. What is our risk? What is our vulnerability? Well, taking not about the board, but from a technical perspective, if you don't have any idea what is your risk exposure for your LLM or agentic AI, do a security testing like red teaming. You find your vulnerabilities, and from there you patch things. So I think that might be easier because agentic AI is so new to everyone. Then a lot of things, different things flying around. Even the agent access rights. So agent identity, we always think that you make sure that your agent is treating like a user, make sure they're not over provision. They make sure that when you do the task, it is on the right thing you want them to do. So all this you need to translate. If the board want to understand more, you need to translate it to plain language, like a user, convert it to a user, how we protect a user, how we protect an agent, something like that.
Thanks. And to the audience, again, we are reaching we have around 7 to 8 minutes. If you do have one last questions, please do send over. We will love to answer them. I would like to end this conversation with a sort of like a challenge. And this probably goes first to Matt. No frameworks, no white papers, no start with an assessment. The people watching today, especially who are joining this call, run security, data strategy, and resilience decisions inside real organizations who actually face real constraints. What would be that one concrete action that you would actually do today that you think would materially shift resilience posture against what we have discussed?
I'm going to immediately fail the answer to this because you asked for one. I'm going to give you two. I hope that's allowed. Check my semantics here. The language could probably be improved, but essentially you want to kill any single point of failure from an admin perspective. Don't kill the admin, but if we launch missiles that require people to turn two keys simultaneously, if there is a massive admin level delete that's going to occur within your environment, let's make sure that it's not just one individual that can do that. Make sure that you distribute the responsibility and the authority across your organization. So that's the first simple thing to do here. Secondarily, run a fire drill. How's that? In the next 3 months, the next 90 days, do a zero knowledge recovery. All right. Don't tell your team about it. Throw a non-critical, complex application. Assume your primary storage is gone. Assume that the admin credentials are compromised. Assume the worst. And then get the team to be able to recover that, kind of out of band. How do they work in these kind of environments? So drills, testing, and ensuring that you've got no single point of failure from an admin perspective.
Dr. Shakti?
That's actually an interesting thought, and I really love the fact that, like what Matt mentioned, what if everything is destroyed? How do you still go for backup and recovery? That's interesting. See, in the area, like in the arena or in the area of data backup, data storage, recovery, cybersecurity, and all that, there is this concept called ABAC. This is attribute-based access control, right? Attribute-based access control. This is something that I'm trying to get implemented at Yatra. And let's say there's a 90-day timeline. So in the first 30 days, I try to identify what all data is sensitive. What is PII data? What is financial data? What is that SOX needs? All that. And where all is it stored? That is with the first 30 days. The next 30 days will be to develop this whole automation engine and that software cycle, which takes care of all the metadata, the tagging, and the building of the policy engine. So basically, I want to make in the first 60 days, the whole system attribute based. And once again, example of attribute is that, hey, this data set has to follow version 4 of DPDP, right? That's an attribute. Then in the last 30 days, I would say I would want to hard code everything, hard code the attributes, and be 100% sure that that if I have this backup and recovery, it does not move outside the boundary. That it definitely and it very strictly follows the attributes, right, that are tagged against that that backup. And then beyond 90 days, as Matt mentioned, I would like to run hundreds of fire drills and make sure whatever system I have built will work when a catastrophe strikes.
Sylvia?
Well, I think it is very difficult for me to answer as the last person because both gentlemen already just speaking out a lot of the right thing that we need to do. But what I want to add is starting from the top, as I always do, get the board or executive manager buy-in to see why this is important and get the funding. Be the best BFF of your CFO to make sure you get the budget for it and then why it is important. And identify the data inventory, the application inventory as well. Make sure you identify those are critical, make sure you need to protect your crown jewel, and then you apply the level of protection that is necessary according to different jurisdiction.
Thanks. And we have one question, which I think it's an interesting ending point. Mr. Anonymous or Mrs. Anonymous have asked, we are talking about AI and stricter data regulations. So coming back to balancing innovation and data sovereignty and compliance, are we looking at a new level of balance, especially when compliance regulations seem to be keep on moving laterally and forward? Maybe Dr. Shakti, you can try.
Yeah. See, we actually do this. Okay. How do you use a large language model? How do you use a product or a tool like ChatGPT? So let's say when I open a ChatGPT window or a Gemini window, and I foolishly submit my code, then that code can be used to train that large language model. Next time when someone else goes in, it will say, hey, this is Yatra's code and this is what Yatra is doing, right? So here you have AI and then you are dealing with data. But the right way to do it is use the paid APIs. Send that information over using an API. In that case, the companies responsible for these models will hold your data for 30 days. They will ensure that there's nothing malicious about the data, but that data will never be used to train the model. Number three, the best option is, if you can afford it, is to have your own private model on the cloud. You can have a version of OpenAI, and then you do it. Then that model is completely out of hands of even OpenAI, and that can never get trained. That is how you make sure that your data doesn't reach the large language model. Then there are, AI regulations. So I want to highlight that in US, the AI regulations are geared towards innovation. Okay, but the same AI regulations in Europe are geared towards caution and not on innovation. So right now, this is an emerging field. What's the right way to do things? What's the right way to handle it? But AI is no different from any other software. This artificial intelligence is another way of using it, but it's no different than what we had, when blockchain was introduced, which was another piece of software. So you would deal with AI the same way you would deal with other software.
Sylvia, last thoughts?
I would say that always this is the struggle, how to use emerging technology and balance those regulations, requirement, and compliance. I will always refer to the business case. When you have a new idea, how do you justify? You need to bring everything on the table. Either your benefits, your cost, the compliance have a cost, states obviously have a cost, and then the risk. Make sure everything is in place. And some of the business case, some of the people always say, hey, training or cost, I just use external vendor and put the vendor cost there. But no, it might be internal training. Some of the hidden costs you haven't considered yet. But make sure that you put everything in place. And then if you have a business case that is value for the business, then go for it. So this is how you should balance always this technology and then with the compliance.
Matt, you have any last words of wisdom?
Oh, good Lord, I'm going to have to be succinct here. Let me say this. I'll just talk about a direction of travel and a strategy. You want to incorporate sovereignty, you want to incorporate compliance. I wouldn't recommend doing it in isolation or doing a sovereignty project. I recommend doing it as a plus project. So, for example, I might be doing some application modernization, performance improvements, plus sovereignty. I might be doing cloud repatriation, geopatriation, plus sovereignty. So I recommend that it is just a new metric that is striped upon new projects that are launched inside the organization rather than a new burden that you're giving to the teams.
Thank you. And thank you all three of you to join. We are just about to end. We will see a feedback form. And I would like our audience, please, once you see the feedback form, take a moment to scan the QR code and fill out the form. It's not going to take much. It's, I think, a few seconds. But while you're doing that, I'd like to conclude saying that this is about three people, three different takes, but that's the point. Matt gave us the architecture of the problem. The attack has moved upstream of where most organizations are defending. Sylvia has given us the organizational truth. The architecture can't fix on its own. More than 70% of that time isn't just one reason why more than 70% of her time isn't at a SOC, but at a boardroom translating it. And Dr. Shakti gave us the dimension, I think, that gets the least attention in this room, the AI system that moves across jurisdictional lines faster than the policies designed to govern it. So here's the question I would like to leave you with. We've spent an hour on how to recover cleanly, but the harder question underneath it all is, how do you know what clean means in real time under multiple jurisdictions when your AI may have already moved the data? Your board will be asking that question when something goes wrong. Today was a preparation for that moment. Please join me in thanking Matt, Sylvia, and Shakti, and thank you everyone for watching. On behalf of CDOTrends and Everpure, stay safe and stay secure.